What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video, and the deck that we're going to be looking at today here on Monday is a deck that did, I would say, surprisingly well in the Modern Challenge. Now, it isn't an archetype that is necessarily new to the format. People have been playing the style of deck, but just not to the, obviously, the effect of something like the Evoke decks and even like Tron, like Hardened Scales, with Scales actually winning this challenge in particular. But I wanted to look at Dimir Coffers because typically this is a mono black deck that tries to abuse the amount of mana that Coffers makes, which obviously we'll get into here in a second. But this is definitely an interesting take and has an interesting win condition to the deck that, when we look at the list, I'll have you try to find it here in a second. But of course, before we get too deep into the Dimir Coffers deck, I'd appreciate it if you, seen my content before, or if you like what you see, subscribing to the channel, ring the notification bell, leaving a like on the video. All free, easy things to support me and my, content, and just keep having me make content. That's how English works. I would definitely appreciate all the support I can get. Thank you for clicking on the video, all that. And if you want to support even further, I have a Discord server down in the description. There's a link. Go ahead, follow it, join, all that great stuff. Talk about Magic. Just something I really like doing. And I would definitely like to have some conversations with the people that, watch my videos and how I can be better as not only a player, but as a content creator as well. So anyway, Dimir Coffers, you might better know it as Mono Black, as I kind of said in the intro. Typically, you're seeing like this combo of Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth that says each land is a swamp in addition to its other types, which essentially allows every land to tap for black mana, including Urborg itself, even though it does not inherently tap for mana itself. And then you pair it up with this card, Cabal Coffers. Try to get it in the screen here. It doesn't tap for mana itself necessarily, unless you have a Urborg in play. But Cabal Coffers notably is not a legendary land either, so you can have multiple copies of these in play, and you can pay 2 and then tap it to add a black mana for each swamp you control. So there was a card like this, I think it was like Cabal Citadel or something like that in Dominaria, that cared about basic swamps and was kind of a fixed version of this Cabal Coffers. And essentially with Urborg and a Cabal Coffers, you essentially get to add mana equal to the number of lands that you have. Because, barring any, crazy things that like change or take away land types and stuff, with just Urborg, Cabal Coffers, you have the potential to have a bunch of black mana in play. On top of that, you have cards like Watery Grave that already has like the swamp typing, Xander's Lounge, also a swamp. You have Basic Swamp, which is a swamp. Crazy, I know. And really, I guess that's it as far as like the lands that are actually swamps, but you're kind of taking advantage of the fact that you want an Urborg. It's going to turn all these non-swamps into swamps, and you're going to add a ton of mana with Cabal Coffers. So now the question is, what are we doing with all that mana? And I think some of the easiest thing to do when you just make a ton of mana is just play Karn the Great Creator and jam your sideboard with a ton of impactful sideboard cards that will eventually win you the game. And there was like a combo in a way that you can play in this deck that essentially allows you to win the game, and it's not going to be super surprising because essentially like Mono Blue Tron uses a win condition for a very long time, just it played at main deck instead of playing it in the sideboard. Probably nowadays if you see Mono Blue Tron, it plays in the sideboard, but you have like a Karn the Great Creator, and with enough mana plus an Academy Runes, which Academy Runes says that you put an artifact from your graveyard on top of your library. This is important because you can go get Mindslaver with your Karn the Great Creator, and Mindslaver is 6 mana to play it, and then 4 to activate it, and you sacrifice Mindslaver, and you control target player's next turn. So essentially what you can do is you can play the Mindslaver, activate it, take your opponent's next turn, do whatever. Go to your turn, you untap. On your upkeep, you activate Academy Runes to put the Mindslaver on top of your deck. You end up drawing the Mindslaver, and then with enough mana, you're able to play it, use it, and then eventually, like, you're going to hit enough land drops, like eventually, like you could win with like Orcish Bowmaster and stuff like that. Like you can force your opponent into some like bad attacks or whatever, or just like stop them from playing things altogether. And you can beat down with like an Orcish Bowmaster. You could beat down with Jengatha. You could just essentially like end up like forcing them to make like the worst decisions. Like your opponent is going to get turns, but they're not going to get another turn. Of course, you have cards like Liquid Metal Coating, where if you just take your opponent's turn, you just activate Karn again, go get Liquid Metal Coating, and then you can just start blowing up all their lands, so that even if for some reason you don't want to loop, they're not going to be able to do anything about it, because they're just not going to have any lands in play. And then you can slowly blow up their permanents by playing like Cityscape Leveler, and so on and so forth. Like this deck has the potential to just kind of like make its land drops, get to the late game by like suspending like Profane Tutor to go search for any one of the missing pieces, whether you need an Urborg, Cabal Coffers, your one of Academy Ruins. It has Expedition Map to go get said lands. You get to play main deck Stone of Eric, which, if a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile it instead. This is kind of like some turn one interaction for like the Dimir, the Rakdos like Evoke deck. And you can also cash it in later for a card and exiling someone's graveyard in the process. You have one of Oblivion Stone. You have 3 the One Ring in your main deck, with 1 in the sideboard, of course, to grab with Karn. You have cards like Cling to Dust to mess with the graveyard. This is another form of like 1-mana interaction that you can use to like kind of take creatures out of your opponent's graveyard. And of course with Escape as well, eventually you're going to just be playing spells, cards are going to end up in your graveyard, and you can kind of escape this Cling to Dust to eat some more of your opponent's cards, maybe get some card advantage by getting a draw card, exiling some creatures, kind of gain some life, buffer your life total that way. 4 Fatal Push, 4 Spell Pierce, essentially more. I mean, like, Fatal Push in a way is kind of like interaction if you hold a Polluted Delta or something to that effect. To like interact with like a Grief. Of course, not going to be super reliable when you're playing 4 fetch lands in your 26 land deck, but that is an option. Spell Pierce probably more than likely being the other like 1-mana interaction that you would have by essentially countering the Not Dead After All that gets played, or the Undying Evil that ends up getting played. And of course Shielder's Edict as well, just usually getting to deal with like the threat that you want it to deal with. I think there's very rarely any time where like Shielder's Edict has not like killed the creature that it's intending to kill. Nonetheless, like at 2 copies, like totally fine. And yeah, that's the Dimir Coffers deck. So some thoughts on the deck and everything. Of course, it gets to use probably one of the most broken planeswalkers ever created, Karn the Great Creator, and actually have a very interesting way of like winning the game. Essentially, is like mind-slaving your opponent. Again, this is like nothing new. Like this is stuff that Tron, like Mono Blue Tron, has been doing forever. Just it would play it like in the main deck, and you would have other ways to kind of like search out Mindslaver. But of course Karn just kind of is like the all-in-one package where you can like shut down some of your opponent's artifacts just off the rip. You get to play a sideboard with these powerful artifacts like Liquid Metal Coating. You can go get EE for the Cascade, Rhinos matchups. You have Spreading Seas to mess with people's lands, like especially like in the mirrors and stuff. You can just like turn off their coffers by turning it into an island. I believe it just turns it into an island. So I think even like messing with like their Urborg and stuff. But if you have an Urborg, things happen. And the interesting thing too is that this sideboard is kind of less dependent on these like sideboard artifacts than we see from Karn decks. Where you see like, I would say like every card or like all but like 2 or 3 cards are usually like Karn targets. This, you have 3 Aether Gust, 3 Tails End, 2 Spreading Seas. At 3 Aether Gust, so you have 8 cards that are dedicated to like kind of interacting in that way, and then like the other 7 cards in the sideboard, or the other 6 cards in the sideboard, excuse me, are all like Karn targets, which is actually interesting for a deck like this, especially since it can generate a ton of mana. Obviously, it can't like necessarily out-generate Tron unless it just plays like a bunch of lands or has a bunch of Cabal Coffers in play, but nonetheless, it's still very impressive. to see it kind of lean into more of an interactive sideboard, and having kind of the right, maybe not necessarily the right mix, but definitely a mix of interactive spells plus artifacts on the sideboard. So yeah, that is Dimir Coffers for Modern. Interesting deck. 6-1 in the challenge is nothing to snub your nose at. Unfortunately, going down in the quarterfinals, but nonetheless, still a good showing for an archetype that kind of gets a lot of love, I think, from a lot of content creators, because I think it is a deck that creates some generally good content, but not being like the norm of the format. So really cool, really interesting. Going to try to get some matches in with this deck to kind of show off and hopefully do the thing. So if that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel, ring the notification bell, all that fun stuff. Leave a like on the video as well. Some easy ways to support my channel, and of course go to the link in the description down below to the Discord server. That's gonna do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.